All right, good evening. How is everybody? Yeah? Thank you for coming. I'm excited to see so many folks here. Welcome to the fourth event in the Diverse Roots at the Common Table lecture series, a series focused on culinary conversations in the American South. My name is Erica Abrams-Locklear. I'm a professor in the English department here at UNC Asheville, and I've got a few things, I'll try to make it quick, to share with you before I introduce tonight's speakers. First, if you'd like to attend more lectures like this one, keep an eye out for announcements about future speakers. This series runs through the spring semester of 2025, and we are planning to have a speaker or panel of speakers each semester. This fall, for example, we'll focus on indigenous foodways in the South. Historian Melinda Maynor-Lowry and cultural anthropologist Courtney Lewis will be in conversation about the important role that Lundy and Cherokee food traditions play in Southern cuisine. The event is at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, October 16th. We're planners, so mark your calendars. Second, tonight's roundtable conversation will last about an hour, followed by approximately 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. We have a microphone mounted on a stand, and where is our Q&A microphone? Right here. Everyone's pointing to it. This is where you go to ask your questions. We're live streaming the event, and we get much better sound if the mic is stationary, so we don't have a runner to run it throughout the audience. Please refrain from making comments or observations. We want to hear as many questions as possible. And to facilitate a pleasurable reading and Q&A, please silence your cell phones and any electronic devices that you've got that might make noise. Once we conclude discussion, please remain in your seats until our speakers have had time to get situated at the malaprops table located near the entrance to this room. Many people have worked hard to make this event a success, and I'd like to thank them briefly now. First, a big thank you to our event partner, Malaprops Bookstore and Cafe. Everybody clap. Asheville's own local independent bookstore. They have advertised this event widely, and they are here tonight selling books. Thank you, Stephanie Jones-Beard, Justin Souther, Patricia Furnish, who's back there at the table. Wave, Patricia. And the rest of the Malaprops crew. So one note, they weren't able to transport all of the books here from our amazing authors that you might want to buy, but Patricia wants me to let you know that you can place orders tonight, and she will have them ready for you tomorrow at the store. So the store is brimming over, so feel free to place an order. Big thanks go to Asheville Citizen Times reporter Tiana Cannell, Gina Malone, editor of the Laurel of Asheville magazine, food writers Kay West, Andy Hall, Tennille Tracy, and Gina Smith. The marketing and communications department here at UNC Asheville also deserve a big thanks for their help with event promotion. Funding for this event is made possible thanks to the Thomas Howerton Distinguished Professor of the Humanities Professorship. Thank you as well to our tech team, Chris Asbel, Kevin Fuller, Kent Thompson, and Scott Savo, who are making all of these things work. And finally, my biggest thanks go to Marcie Cohen Ferris, Sandra Gutierrez, and Ronni Lundy. All of whom said yes when I invited them to be part of this series. I was a little bit blown away that I was able to get all three of you on the stage together at the same time. So if you're here, then you already know that you're in for a treat. These women are giants of the food world, so let me tell you just a little about each of them. For over 40 years, Marcie Cohen Ferris has studied, documented, interpreted, exhibited, taught, and written about the South, largely through its foodways, material culture, and the Southern Jewish experience. As a professor emeritus in the Department of American Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Ferris is an editor for Southern Cultures, a quarterly journal of the history and cultures of the U.S. South, and a senior leadership advisor to the Center for the Study of the American South. She is the author of Edible North Carolina, The Edible South, Matzoh Ball Gumbo, and she is a co-editor of Jewish Roots in Southern Soil. And just so you know, Edible North Carolina is the impetus for tonight's roundtable. Next, Ronni Lundy is hands down one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known, experts on Appalachian food in America. Her 2016 Appalachian Cookbook Victuals won the James Beard Book of the Year Award and the award for Best in American Cooking. She is the author of a number of other cookbooks, including Shuck Beans, Stack Cakes, and Honest Fried Chicken, Butter Beans to Blackberries, In Praise of Tomatoes, Sorghum Savor, and more. Her edited collection, Cornbread Nation 3, Foods of the Mountain South, is required reading for anyone interested in food, literature, and representation. Ronni was a founding member of the Southern Foodways Alliance and the Appalachian Food Summit. Marcie was also deeply involved in those organizations, the Southern Foodways Alliance, as is Sandra. In 2009, she received the Southern Foodways Alliance Craig Claiborne Lifetime Achievement Award, and currently she runs Plot Hound Books in Burnsville, North Carolina. So if you live here, you should really take a trip up to Burnsville and visit the bookstore. And finally, Sandra Gutierrez is a journalist, author, food historian, and professional cooking instructor. She has written 5 cookbooks and is considered one of the top national experts on Latin American foodways and Southern American cuisine. She has over 3,000 original recipes and over 1,500 articles published worldwide. In 2017, Gutierrez was awarded the MFK Fisher Grand Prize Award for Excellence in Food Writing. In 2019, her work in culinary objects became part of a permanent food exhibit at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. She is the author of the New Southern Latino Table, Latin American Street Food, and more. Her newest book, Latinissimo, Home Recipes from the 21 Countries of Latin America, features approximately 500 recipes, a number she spent 4 years whittling down from about 9,000 recipes. I look forward to hearing more about this encyclopedic accomplishment. We are extremely fortunate to have these women here with us tonight, so without further delay, please join me in welcoming them to UNC Asheville. Okay, so my first question, and I want to have a small role in all of this so you know, is for Marcie. So as you know, this lecture series highlights diverse food traditions in the South, and you actually kicked off the lecture series with your wonderful lecture called Edible Jewish South. You were part of the Farm to Table event, and it was extraordinary. And your latest book, Edible North Carolina, continues to highlight these diverse foodways and is the impetus for tonight's discussion. And 2 of the essayists included in that book are sitting on this stage, Ronni Lundy, Sandra Gutierrez. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came to put that book together, how you decided who to include, where you found those people, what the process was like?
Okay, just remind me what all those are questions, because I just forget.
Okay.
So when I stop, I add some more. But I've got to add, besides, I just want to tell you quickly, well, thank you for having me as part of this wonderful group and to be with y'all tonight. It's really an honor. The western part of North Carolina, the mountains are a really critical site to this book. I turned to Elizabeth Sims, who's right there, and to Ronni Lundy to really help me think about how to go about, I did a lot of interviewing before we got going with the book, just did a big old field trip around the state. I just did a lot of driving. You might have seen the image that said, always cut your bagel in half before you go, down the mountain. It's just a good idea, because if you're eating it and you're driving by yourself, it's dangerous. So I just want to list also who's here that's also involved in this book. I'm the editor of Edible North Carolina, along with my associate editor, who is a former doctoral student of mine, Casey Highsmith, who lives in Carborough, North Carolina. She's a fantastic young scholar doing wonderful work. You should Google her and follow her food work. And we found wonderful people that I'll tell you a little bit more about that process, but also included in the book, Kia Mastriani has an essay, and where she talks very much about the Forever Farm that she created with her partner and husband, Jamie Swafford. And that's a beautiful essay, and that's entitled To Be Rather Than To Seem, Creating a Food Life in the Foothills. And that's really Kia's story, talking about how does a young couple today really go about finding land, creating a farm, creating a dream. They both came from very different worlds. What's that process like? We know it's got a lot of challenges, and Kia really shared those in a really, really beautifully powerful way, along with her recipe for strawberry pie. And so Ronnie's essay, I just wanted to say, is entitled Crafting Asheville's Foodtopia, 2 Decades in the Mountain South. And that's where you really took a historical look back at this food landscape, of the vibrant food landscape that we all know in Asheville today. But Ronni was like, how and why? And she went about doing that by profiling like four individuals, including Elizabeth Sims, who's here. And Sandra's essay, Pulling Up a Chair at the New Southern Latino Table in North Carolina. And we'll talk a lot more about that phrase, pulling up a chair. Your recipe was wonderful cookies, pecan polvorones with a coffee granita, which is just fabulous. And Ronnie's recipe was, the John Fleer's rhubarb's red wine sorghum vinaigrette, which is fantastic. And then, Erica, you mentioned Melinda Maynor-Lowry is going to be speaking. She's got an essay here also. To be a Lumbee is to cook, sing, and gather. About this, we just heard an incredible performance last night of Lumbee singing at the Carolina Performing Arts Center, which was amazing last night. And her recipe, of course, is for the famous Lumbee colored sandwich, which we can talk a little bit more about. And then lastly, Courtney Lewis, who also, are they speaking together? Courtney Lewis's essay is entitled Native Food Sovereignty, a North Carolina case study, and her recipe is bean bread. And Courtney is an anthropologist who teaches at Duke, and Melinda Maynor-Lowry was at Chapel Hill and is now at Emory. But, I'll tell you, my husband Bill, who's a folklorist, is here, and he studies in the blues in Mississippi. And Bill had this phrase where he talked always about his doctoral work that he did on the blues in Mississippi, and he said it was like a blues family. And I thought that phrase was really, really powerful, and I always kind of thought, well, that's kind of like what the North Carolina food landscape is like too. It's very much a food family. I mean, many of us know each other, but from very, very different fields. From fields to farms to universities to scholars to brewers to to extension folks to people in PR and journalism. We all are in these food related fields, but we tend to know one another. And I was very interested. I was teaching. This is part of my food teaching that I was doing at the University of North Carolina, and I wanted to kind of zero in on how do we understand food systems in America today, because there's a reason they're called SAD, SAD. It's just a sad food system in general, and I really wanted to dive in through the lens of one state. So we focused on North Carolina in a class, and then a book was supposed to come out of that. And then I thought, well, maybe we should do the book. So this is the book, and turn to individuals had to represent across the state, gender diversity, race, just every factor, age, involvement in different aspects, and so that's really how we chose, and then it was COVID, and so there you go. So that was part of the journey too. But I also just want to mention that my team, besides Casey Highsmith, was a great photographer, Baxter Miller, and you're really seeing all of Baxter's work here, and her partner, Ryan Stansel. They've done a lot of work for our state and for many other publications.
Thank you. So two, of those essayists are right here, and one of the organizing principles of this roundtable is where we see these Latinx and Appalachian food traditions intersecting or not. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, and then maybe pass it over to the folks on the table.
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate something that we talked about early this morning in another group, and that is that when this conversation comes up, we immediately start to think about the most recent migration of Latinx people into the region. But when you're talking about Latinx foodways in Appalachia, we would not have our foodways if it were not for the people of South and Central America. The food that we eat, the primary food that we eat, the corn, the beans, and many of the squash, were developed largely by women in South and Central America who saw, that person who saw a grass with one seed and not only figured out how to cultivate that and turn it into a corn cob, but then by some fascinating alchemy, realized that if you mix that corn with ashes or with shells from the certain areas of coastal areas, that you increase the nutritional value of that corn by tenfold, and it can become, So we're not talking just about a current phenomena, and we are not talking about people who do not already have a tremendous role and a tremendous claim on what we call Appalachian foodways. And that's just something I feel like it's really important for us to remember, just like it's important for us to remember. Sandra and I have been on a panel where I've done this before, that when the Europeans pulled up in their boats, all the Native Americans were not standing on the shore waving a corn cob and saying, "Thank God you're here, what do we do with this?" Right? We tend to acknowledge that our foods were developed by the people who were here. We don't tend to acknowledge that they understood what to do with them, often in ways that are better than the ways that we do. So I just encourage everybody to kind of adjust your preconception about what the groundwork is here, what the level is here.
And I think that the connection between Appalachia and Latin America is one of similar ingredients, similar cooking techniques, and similar people at the base of our cultures. So in terms of ingredients, and I'm going to tell you some, and you're going to think that's Southern: tomatoes, potatoes, cacao or chocolate, pork. Those are all Latin American based things that came later up south, from below, further south. Cooking techniques, barbecue, barbacoa, the term, was coined by the Taino Indians in the Dominican Republic, today the Dominican Republic, and it was a term that meant cooking food on a stick directly over the fire, and it was barbacoa, still used today in Latin America. they, the indigenous people of South America, took it further along, and when the Spaniards came to the Americas, they loved the fact that they could cook meats directly in the fire, but it wasn't pork, it wasn't beef, it wasn't chicken, because those weren't here before the colonization of Latin America. They were eating duck and venison and turkey and iguanas and turtles and reptiles. So it was different, but the technique was the same. It was the enslaved people of the Latin American countries, starting in Brazil, that are responsible for disseminating the technique and bringing it up to the South. So just by talking about ingredients, about techniques, and about culture, you can see all we have in common already. And you probably didn't think about that before you walked into this room. So this is going to put a completely different spin on anything that you hear today, because we all start from a place of commonality, not from a place of difference.
You know, and also I think what's so powerful about what they're both saying, I mean, it's like the power of the breadth of the food landscape and the origins of food in this planet that come out of the global South, and also that the South, Appalachia included, is this place where, is one of the places in the world where agriculture is domesticated. Where it happens, what Ronni was exactly describing, you know, that someone sees a grass and takes a bite of it and thinks, you know, I think we can do this is good. I'm going to try to grow more, we're going to domesticate this, and takes a wild plant. And that only happens in a very few places in the world. And so the South is one of those, and especially like the lower Mississippi River Valley. I learned a little bit of this from our fabulous folks in archaeology at the University of North Carolina. And Vince Stepanidis, who's a great archaeologist, talks about the food abundance that existed, especially like in the Mississippian period. And that's about when corn, that's why the Mississippian period happens, because corn is introduced. So corn makes its way up from Mesoamerica, you know, through the Southwest, across into our region. And then it provides, and that's mound builders in the Mississippian area, you know, that, and we see the evidence of those incredible mound, you know, communities. And you have to have enough people, and then you have to have enough food to sustain a population to build that kind of hierarchical society, you know, with priests and, you know, and that it took corn, you know, but there were also the negative sides of that, of drought and disease and pandemic. You know, it's also cyclical, but this world is so deeply historically connected to that early history. And when we think about Pangea and where this, why this is such a, you know, biologically, yet just such a rich area, but all those connections to Latin America are incredible.
I'm thinking about something that you were just saying, and I'm going to kind of move the conversation a little bit in the direction of Edible, North Carolina, and talk about one of the people who I didn't profile in my essay, but who I introduced in the introduction to the essay, and that is John Stelling. John and his wife Julie, as many of you know, opened the Early Girl Cafe in early 2002, which was right about the time that I had moved to Asheville, and we became friends, and John and I became traveling buddies sometimes, because he's a great person to ride along with. He and Edward Lee are two of my favorite people to ride along in a car with, because they never met a food stand they didn't want to stop at. At that particular time, when Early Girl opened, there was starting to be this food movement here in the Asheville area, and it was a perfect storm certain things. There was, first of all, there was the program at Warren Wilson College, which is extraordinary, the farm program there. And they were raising not your romantic back to the landers, plant a little garden, try to find Jesus on our own, thank you, Mr. Prime, kind of romantic concept. They were teaching kids to think about the economics of being a farm person. And one of the people I profiled, Jamie Ager, is a great example of that. When Jamie and his wife, Amy, graduated from Warren Wilson College, their senior project was a 5-year budget for their farm that outlined where they were going to be selling the produce and how they were going to actually make money to keep the farm going and alive, which any of you who have had hickory nutcap meats or seen them in the grocery know that they did very, very well. So that was happening. What was happening was there was this growing interest in the country and the farm to food movement. There were people showing up here who had money. There were a lot of people who were willing to work in the restaurant industry. God bless you all. All these things are going on, but what I wonder made it unique in Appalachia. And in 2008 or 9, Elizabeth Sims, is that the 14th time we've said her name? All right. Elizabeth Sims, who was at the Biltmore, put together this extraordinary 11-day program on Appalachian food and foodways. And it brought in everybody. It brought in a 12-year-old Sean Brock who was making, okay, maybe he was 18, but he was making cornbread. It brought in musicians. Tim O'Brien was there talking about the foods that he grew up eating. There was just a bunch of us hanging out and talking, sitting around, drinking late at night, hearing Roy Blunt tell stories. It was really fabulous. I was on a panel that included John Stelling, and he said the thing that was key to why this food movement took such root here in Asheville and in Western North Carolina. John has a much more famous brother, Robert Stelling, who had the Hominy Grill in Charleston and was nominated for the Beard Awards, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Robert was there too. And John said that when he and Robert talked about farm to table, Robert was going to farmers and saying, I need you to grow this for me. Can you grow this lettuce? Will you grow this shiitake mushroom or whatever was the thing of the moment at the time? Will you grow these things? John Stelling was getting in his beaten up station wagon and driving up and down the mountains, stopping when he saw a farmer in the field, stopping when he saw a food stand, stopping at a restaurant and saying, what is this? What are you growing? How do you cook it? What do you do with it? How is it made? And what he realized is that while the rest of the United States have been overtaken, the agricultural world and the rest of the United States have been overtaken by factory farms, vast fields of grain, hog lots, chicken complexes that went on for miles and miles. Because of our topography, and also I'd like to say because of our national independent orneriness, that had not happened here. You can't have a factory farm in the mountains of Appalachia because they won't allow it. They simply will not allow it. You're farming on slant, you have to, in fact, in my family, people didn't even have one garden. You had a garden for the sun food, and you had a garden for the shady food, and they would be in different places. And your grandmother had a different garden than your grandfather because they didn't like the same bean or tomatoes, right? So this sort of micro farming movement had never left the Appalachian Mountains. So when this movement started to happen, Asheville was just the nexus and the hub of this. And then also because there were some extraordinary people here who saw the vision and who could relate it in story. Sorry.
Can I jump in for just a second?
Yeah,
2008 was the year I came here to start this job.
wow.
And I remember reading in the newspaper about this festival at the Biltmore House, and I was astonished. I thought, this is a thing? People are this excited about mountain food? That's really exciting and very different than my childhood. I grew up in Asheville. That was not something that happened as a kid at all. And Sandra, you write a lot about the changing landscape of food in North Carolina, in the South, in Cary. Can you speak a bit to your experience with that? Because I think it's so important.
Yeah, I write a lot about the New Southern Latino movement, which is what I call it. And it is, particularly in North Carolina and in the New South, what makes it interesting is that it's not Mexican-centric. Mexico is one of the countries that imparts a huge influence on everywhere that you talk about Latin cuisine. But in California and in Arizona and in New Mexico and Texas, it is a Mexican-centric movement because all those territories were once part of Mexico. But here, on this other side of the country, we're very far removed from all of the land, really massive, that is Latin America. And in the 1980s, we start seeing a huge movement of Latinos from every kind of economic background, every type of career background. So you have your migrant workers, you have your doctors, and you have people from all over the economic strata, and you have people from all over Latin America descending in the area that we know as the South all at once. And so what happens when people who share the same ingredients, the same culinary techniques, and the same cultural roots in our food all meet at the same time in the same territory. And that's what we're seeing. We saw the birth of a new branch, if you will, of Southern cuisine. I've always referred to Southern foodways as a large tree, a tree whose roots are three cultures. The Native Americans, depending which groups, wherever you descend upon. So here, the Native Americans, the Cherokees, etc., the Lumbys. But when you go down to South America, you're looking at the Incas. When you go to Mexico, you're looking at the Aztecs, and a lot of other groups. Then you have the Europeans who colonized us. And we were all colonized by the same group of Western European countries. So you have the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the Iberian people, and then you have the Brits. You also have French in different groups, but that they were minor compared to the other three cultures. And they are one of our roots too. But the third one, that very few people realize is also a commonality with Latin America, is the African vein. The importance that the African people brought to the foodways of Latin America and the American South, without which our food would not exist. And so those are at the root of the tree. So that's the part that holds this tree full to the ground, the three cultures that build it. Then you have the trunk of the tree. And in the trunk of the tree, you find the chefs, the people who are the home cooks, the people who are in the back kitchens, the people who are in the big homes cooking for the white folks, the people who are here in the Appalachians cooking, and the people who were in Latin America cooking in their own homes for their own families to survive. And then you have the branches, and the branches are the movements, the culinary movements that form Southern foodways. So you have the Cajun branch, and the Creole branch, and the Appalachian branch, and you have let's think of another one, the coastal branch. And then what I discovered is that there was this little branch that was starting to exist in the street that was the New Southern Latino branch. And at the beginning, there was a little bit of resistance when I started talking about this movement. It was like, no, this can't be happening. We're Southerners, we're Americans. And I'm like, yeah, we're Americans too. And we're even more south than you are. We're Southerners too. But it's not that Latin Americans are trying to take over a cuisine. It's just that there's a new branch in this tree. And the bigger the tree and the more branches it has, the more equity and the more diversity it allows under its shadow. And that's what's happening to Southern foodways all over the place. To come to Asheville, and I promise not to stay away this long, but with a 20-year difference between my 2 trips to Asheville, and to see all of the Latin American influence.
Tell them about
Food, like this
Really?
morning, but this morning, Ronni says, let's get together for breakfast, and she brought guava and cream cheese empanadas, which are called pasteles, from our bakery. I mean, you couldn't get more Cuban than that. That is traditionally Cuban. It's a classic combination of flavors. And then for lunch, we went to La Rumba. And if you haven't been to La Rumba here in Asheville, it's fantastic because it is Mexican cuisine. But I have news for you. It's authentic Mexican food from the southern tip
Yeah, he's
of
from
Mexico,
Veracruz.
So it's different. You're not going to find fajitas, you're not going to find burritos, you're not going to find the things that chips and salsa.
Please tell that.
When instead of chips and salsa, they serve you what we call crazy corn or locos locos, which are corn in the cob that has been boiled, and then it's slathered in Duke's mayonnaise, because it's got to be Duke's. Because in Latin America, we like our mayonnaise without sugar added. And we used to make it at home. So that's why we like Duke's mayonnaise. That's another thing we have in common. And then they roll it in tortilla cheese and they top it with some kind of powdered chile, whether it's ancho or guajillo, depends what you have on hand. And that is in place of your chips and salsa. And I dare anyone to tell me it's not as good or better than chips and salsa. Okay. And so I invite you to go there and just try the different experience of Latin American food through the Mexican window, because I think that one of the things that is happening in North Carolina is that not only are you getting the diversity of 21 countries coming together into the Southern Territory and bringing flavors and recipes into being where they collide, they really do collide with Latin America. Just to give you an example, you go to Charleston and you go to have lunch and you have a sheep soup, and it's creamy and it's deliciously spicy and it's warm and it's got all the seafood in it. But if you go south and you go to Honduras or to Belize, not even to go that far away, you get soups called tapados, which are our chowders, which are creamy, but they're not creamy with cream or with a bechamel base like they are in the south here. They're creamy with coconut milk. And they have the same seafood. But then they have floating coins of corn, sliced corn, and they have plantains that are boiled in that chowder. And you start seeing the similarities, and that's what I discovered when I wrote the new Southern Latino table, that I could create a dish and sit a Southerner and a Latino with each other, and both people would say, this reminds me of something my grandmother used to do, but there's something that's different. And there, on the table, at the table, sharing a meal, they could find the commonalities and start a conversation from a point of trust and from a point of amicability rather than from a point of otherness. So that is what's happening in the South. It's happening big time here in Asheville. It's happening everywhere in the southern part of the United States, the southern region, and it's super exciting to see, but it's happening organically. People are not aware that they're part of it. You're all part of it. If you've ever had a hush puppy that has jalapenos in it, you've been part of it. Or a barbecue sauce with chipotle peppers, you've been a part of it. Or you've had a tomato sandwich with chipotle mayonnaise, you've been a part of it. I mean, there are all these things that you're probably eating and you don't even realize. Collard green empanadas, anything like that. And
Are there the big Latin markets here too? Like
huge Latin market.
Like there's like you see it, but they have them here too?
You have, not necessarily here, but I was talking to Elena, who's a professor here earlier today, and she told me that there's this big store, La Única, nearby. We have huge supermarket stores and small Latin tiendas that pop all over the place. You will find a lot of the small mom and pop owned Latin tiendas in this area. And I encourage you to go in and see them, because some are owned by Guatemalans, but the other might be owned by Argentinians, and the other one is owned by Mexicans. And everything that you will find in each store is completely different from the next, because that is the diversity that Latin America brings to a South that was strictly black and white.
So Burnsville, where I live, has a population of 1,800 people, and we have 3 small tiendas in Burnsville. So I'm trying to remember, there's a whole thing about the rodeo. There's a Mexican rodeo that happens up here also, and I'm going down a path I shouldn't, because I can't see my way. No, but anyway, this is becoming a part of our cultural landscape as well, because people are living here now. One of the things that Sandra and I were talking about earlier was the fact that my family was part of the Appalachian diaspora. I was born in Corbin, Kentucky, and my parents moved to Louisville when I was a child so my father could work. And so my connection to my roots was a matter of going up home. And that was the second time my parents had been involved in a diaspora. During World War II, they went to Detroit, so my father could work in the munitions industry there. And I think about what my family experienced, probably my most foundational Appalachian literary text, the one that, as somebody said, you can have one book and take it with you. It would be The Dollmaker by Harriet Arno, which is about a woman and her family who become a part of the diaspora, leaving Kentucky and going to Detroit. And the shattering of sense of loss of culture and connection and people, and also extraordinary food. A big part of that book has to do with the woman Gertie trying to buy food from the greengrocer, who's Italian, that has some sort of flavor compared to what she remembered from her home. And I think about this pretty frequently in my small town, which now has people who have had to leave their homes because of economic reasons as well, and wonder how do we make this connection? How do we counter that sense of being a stranger in a strange land? And food becomes a piece of that, you know? I mean, just consider the fact that the fundamental food for our culture and the culture, most of the people who moved to Burnsville are from Michoacan. And our fundamental foods are pinto beans and a bread made of corn, right? We eat ours with a lot of onion. They eat theirs with chili, right? Then we taste the chili and we eat ours with chili too, right? So that connection is there in these ways that you don't have to look very deeply in order to see them and in order to make some sort of personal connection with them.
You know, I just wanted to go back for a second to what Ronni was talking about of what really begins the food movement, the vibrant food movement. Another factor that Charlie Jackson helped me understand over here and across the state of North Carolina, and y'all probably know Charlie Jackson was the founder of ASAP, the Appalachian Sustainable Agricultural Project, in the 1990s, and we were talking about the federal tobacco buyout. Right, and whenever, across the state, small farmers or big farmers who are growing tobacco, and then they have to either they stay in it or they make a radical decision to change. And a lot of people in this region, especially in the Piedmont where we live, made the decision to go to vegetables, or to produce, or to grow fruit, and or open maybe you go grapes, you might get a winery, are you going to do cider? What are you going to make? You're going to make some kind of a pivot at that moment, and there was money available to help you make that pivot, like through the Golden Leaf. When the money from the tobacco buyout went into the Golden Leaf Foundation in our state, that money was available to folks to try to help them through those difficult economic times. But that's followed by the farm crisis of the 1980s, where a lot of larger mid-sized farmers just, everything is devastated by lower prices, by, more yield, because of fertilizer and globalization and what's happening. TMO, you know, it's really devastates. You know, it's another piece that devastates the, you know, the standard American diet. And, you know, we start to see that these small farms, and they're the best model in this part of the state of how to try to make it. Y'all are probably one of the best models of how you're making, of how you're trying, you know, what you do, how you wake up every day and you try to figure out what do we do. And here's Chris, also from Utopian Sea Project. And Chris is part of Maya Serdam's essay here. And his voice in saving seed, exploring, you know, new seed options and new crops and new plants, and new, you know, this is so powerful in this region. So we're really grateful to your work too.
The strength of food is that we are able to communicate at a very organic, natural, trusting level from the very start. Think of feeding somebody in your home. Somebody comes to your house, they're trusting that what you're going to give them, that they're going to eat and introduce into their body is not going to poison them to begin with, right? Just that is huge trust, right? Well, after you've gone through that bridge where you can trust each other, it becomes so much easier to be able to understand each other. And that is what we've done over the years also when we talk together, is tell people, go to a table. Find a seat at the table, bring somebody else to sit with you and discover who they are, and discover the likeness that you have, and discover the differences, and learn to listen to each other. I always say, don't throw food at each other. Like, eat together and talk with each other and learn that there are going to be differences, but always remembering that what brought you to the table in the first place was that similarity, was that place of commonality that introduces trust.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about specific foods and recipe development. To take these ideas and to talk a little bit about how they apply when you're creating recipes for your book, or when you're including recipes in vittles, for example. And I know you've written a lot about the huge change in food and ingredient accessibility in Cary, for example. So could you kind of walk us through that transformation and maybe talk about how that's impacted recipe development?
Sure, I'd love to. Cary, for those of you who don't know, stands for Containment Area for Relocated Yankees. So my husband and I automatically did not belong the moment we moved there in the early 90s. And Cary was very white and very upper scale economically. And all of a sudden, Cary is so diverse right now. You go to Cary and you find the largest Korean store you can think of, Indian stores all over the place. You find Vietnamese places, Middle Eastern stores, next to Trader Joe's. You know, you see, it's so diverse and it's so, not complicated, but it's created like a quilt of cultures that stands out from many other areas in the United States. That usually was reserved only for very big cities. Like New York, you would see this kind of conglomeration of different cultures. In terms of food, it has changed what we eat. It has changed what we shop for. You can now go to Food Lion and buy a big brisket, a full brisket that's not only the slim part, and then you can buy an arrachera, which is a type of meat that you use to make fajitas, in the same counter that you can buy sausages, or breakfast sausage for the morning breakfast with cornbread, or to make your sausage gravy for your biscuits. It's all together, it's all in the same place. That wasn't heard of when we moved to North Carolina. I remember no one had heard of cilantro when we moved here in 1985. It's like, what's that? Some people recognized it as Chinese parsley. That's how far away we go. And I remember trekking to Wellspring, which is now a Whole Foods store in 9th Street in Durham, to buy a 1-pound bag and a paper bag of black beans. because they only got like a 10-pound bag every month, and you could only buy 1 pound at a time in little paper bags, and no one knew what to do with them. I tried to plant them. I should have tried harder, because now I know how to do it. But it didn't occur to me to continue. But really, it's that the ingredients were here. The only chiles that you could find were tinned, all the paso green chiles. And my first tamales were made with grits, which is the same ingredient. It's mixed tamalized corn, but treated in a different way, and colored things. And that reminded me of the chiquilin tamales of Guatemala, which are completely different from tamales that you find in other countries. So nostalgia brought the need for us to find the intersection between food so we could create foods that fed us, that fed our souls. But Southerners around us were also picking up on that, and they were bringing in those ingredients and bringing on those flavors because it reminded them of something they had had before. So it wasn't scary. You didn't have to take a very far leap of faith to try it because, oh, that looks like something I've eaten before. So, and that's, I think, the same in all over the South. What's happening in Cary is we're becoming less afraid of the other. As much as this country is going through a lot of fear of the other right now, I think small communities are losing the fear of the other. They're being more accepting and open to trying new things through food. I think food is the first step. After that, you can discuss anything else. But food is a really easy way to get people to find commonality. Everybody likes to eat, for the most part. If you don't like to eat, you're not my people. Everybody likes to eat, and even if you don't like to cook, you like to eat, and everybody needs to eat. So those two things together already bring something in common between us.
I was thinking, can I say one thing to tie in with Sandra real quick? What you were talking about, this kind of a really diverse food landscape, and it feels like it happens, maybe in a distant urban place, but we know we see that here, like you're saying, and in Cary and Raleigh. And I was looking at Kia and thinking about Kia Mastriani is also an oral historian, and for the Southern Foodways Alliance did a major project of interviewing food entrepreneurs up and down the Central Avenue corridor in Charlotte. And if anybody spent time down in Charlotte doing that, it tells you about also, again, the changing economics of the state. That was an area that had a lot of small businesses and strip malls. It was definitely like a working class region, and it was businesses that had gone out of it, like dead Radio Shacks and phone stores and all, and those, the immigrants that had arrived from Ethiopia and from Africa and from Iran and from the Middle East, and were living in affordable housing and houses, up near Central Avenue, and could afford rent where those businesses had absolutely closed. And it looks about the same, but an incredibly vital, interesting, delicious world. Our friend Tom Hanchet, who's a historian for the New South Museum, or was, and it just does incredible, knows that world is a great tour guide of the deliciousness of that world. But you can also look at those interviews online through the Southern Foodways Alliance.
When you're talking about recipe development and ingredients, my second book, or as I refer to it, the book that time forgot, because no one knows I wrote it or where it is or what happened to it. But it was called The Festive Table, and I was writing about different celebrations, how people were changing celebrations to reflect the realities of new families and new belief systems. And I was doing a recipe from wonderful Iranian chef Anush Shariat in Louisville, Kentucky, and it had pomegranate molasses in it. And I had the worst copy editor in the history of the universe, and that's really saying a lot for those of you who are writers. she was just amazing what she could argue about. And she wrote back this very lengthy note saying that she had been everywhere within a 12-block area of her apartment in New York City and could not find pomegranate molasses, and that needed to come out of the book. And I wrote back and said, sorry, 2 blocks away from my house in Louisville, Kentucky, there's a grocery where I bought my pomegranate molasses. You need to get around more. We have lived through a period of time. As I noted earlier today, I am the oldest person on this panel, and in my lifetime, I didn't eat an avocado, I didn't see an avocado until I was 22 years old, right? But in my lifetime, we have become a global foodscape. We are no longer limited by the economics of where we live. You can come to my Ingalls in Burnsville, North Carolina, and they have a really excellent section of Latino, Asian, not Scandinavian, kosher foods. You can find all of these ingredients and foods that you once could not. So in some ways, when we talk about these things, we're talking not about something that's happening, but something that's already happened. You know, we have become a global foodscape, and my family adored hot sauce long before it became a very cool thing. My family ate tamales. They came out of a jar, but they were tamales, and they loved them, and it was very, very important to them. We are still trying to track down with Mike Costello, who is an Appalachian farmer, chef, and writer and communications person. There was a huge Spanish community that came into West Virginia to work in the mines in the 1950s, right? And we're trying to track how these foods became a part of the West Virginia foodways. There's a food in Appalachia that is very near and dear to me called the chili bun. Not a chili dog, there's no dog in it, it's a chili bun. And the chili bun is very finely ground meat like you find in a taco that is spiced like meat you find in a taco, but instead of being in a taco shell, it is packed into a hot dog bun. And then you put mustard in there with it because it wasn't hot enough. This was my mother's definition of the best chili bun, if it made the sweat right down on the top of your lip, right? That's how spicy it was. And then you put onions, raw onions on top of that. And we know that it primarily exists in the railroad towns that served coal country. So we know there's some sort of connection there. What we don't know is, could this be a Latino connection? Could this have been people working on the railroad who would come into the mines who were making this food, which obviously has some sort of connection to Latino foodways, right?
Or it's food born from strife and poverty and need, which is another thing that unites our cultures together. You know?
Absolutely.
These are simple foods that once you translate them to a different place because of the way that they're prepared, seem very exotic, but they really aren't. Or at least they're not exotic to the people who are making it and eating it every day.
Sandra, in Bill Smith's essay, which is about the comments, they are my brothers, they are my family, and it's really about the incredible community that he's had with the chefs and the cooks that have worked with him at Crook's Corner,
and how they've changed the menu and how summer met.
Right. And but he talks about one of the most important things that he valued about what they brought to Crook's was the power of utilitarian food. The honesty, deliciousness, and to value salsas and pozole and, and that's more than enough,
Pozole, what we call hominy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the dishes from Bill Smith's restaurant, Cook's Corner, that totally shook my world, where it was his salad made with green peaches and lemon and chili. Because that's how Latin Americans, that's how we eat mangoes, that's how we eat oranges, we eat salt and chili, everything salt and chili. And between his crew and Bill, they came to create what is a new Southern Latino dish, which is, it's made with a very quintessential Southern ingredient, which is peaches. And it just translated beautifully. I was very emotional when I first tried it because it brought tears to my eyes, because I recognized the flavor. It was something that I grew up with. And like that, I think food is something that can also bring a lot of emotions to us. And if we're open and we're willing to listen to the voices that are talking to us when we're tasting new things, it can be a very beautiful journey. A very beautiful journey.
We're touching on another piece here of the Latinization, Southern food and Appalachian food that needs to be talked about. Does anybody besides me remember Ruben Blades, the incredible, well, anyway, one of his albums is live in a club in New York, and he's singing in Spanish, and he stops and says, by the way, if you don't understand the words, ask your waiter. Right? And what Bill's story brings to the fore, the fact that I would guess that 90% of the people who are preparing your food in the back of a restaurant of any kind these days, including the Chinese restaurant that is in Burnsville, some of the people in there are Latino as well as being Chinese immigrants, right? Or no, Asian immigrants. I'm sure they're not even Chinese at this point, but Asian immigrants coming here. Your food is being made by people who are here from South America, Central America, and Mexico. Yeah. And that's important to remember. The hands and the spirit and the heart that make your food affects how you feel after you eat it. Which leads me to say, I'm feeling great because we ate at this place called La Rumba, and I cannot say enough times that you need to get me over there. It is fantastic food.
Well, and I'm aware too that we're coming up on time here. Did you have some sort of closing thoughts or comments before we take questions from the audience?
I think my ad was my closing.
That was a good one.
Well, I was just thinking about, that certainly politics is all is all woven into this, and how we manage to all live here in this America today, and these very fraught times. And I think Bill Smith in Chapel Hill is a really good example of the Latinx community that has supported him so strongly in the restaurant, and and it's really been his family. He's gone to Mexico and beyond every year to be with the families of people that work for him. And
he has more godchildren than anybody I know.
And what he did for those godchildren has been to make sure that every single child that he knows of who are the children of the folks that have worked for him have passports. Have American passports, because things are so dangerous that it's really important that if a parent was suddenly removed, arrested, that there was a plan for children. And so this is, I know everyone here is absolutely aware of what all the whole scene involves for us today is incredibly powerful.
Other than politics, food touches really on so many facets of our lives. And the one thing that we forget is our humanity. And Ronni and I were talking about this right before we started the program, that one of the bad things that social media and technology has brought to us in the last 20 years is that we have become more disconnected from each other. And we need to find that connection with one another again. And there is no better place to do it than around the table. And put your phones away and talk to each other and eat together and share and taste. And let's bring back our humanity, our empathy for one another. We have forgotten to be empathetic for each other. We are so divided that we have forgotten that in finding something in common, we can build a stronger, better world. So my last word is eat a lot, but eat with soul. Eat with soul, because that's what Southern food is, after all.
Thank you. So we've got a little bit of time for questions. Just a reminder, please come up and use the microphone so we can hear you and people online can hear you. Any questions? Yeah, come on up.
Please go away. So my question, I'm Cajun culturally, but I've recently become vegetarian, and I'm trying to find new ways to like bring into my culture. I haven't really found anything just because like Cajun food is so meat-based, and I was wondering if there has been like, sorry, do I need to get closer? I was wondering if there has been like anything within like Southern culture, Latin culture, with like the new movement of people doing new like dietary restrictions and moving into like being more plant-based.
In Latin American foodways, you will find a lot of vegan, vegetarian food, a lot of gluten-free food. It's just the way we eat normally. So meat is very much treated, unless you're in the epicenter of the meat center of Latin America, which is Argentina, Uruguay, in South America. You will find that meat is used like the Asians use meat, which is almost like the element of condiment more than the main. So I would say if you want to learn more recipes and use more recipes, try to find Latin American foodways, but also remember your mushrooms. Mushrooms, you can substitute meat and use mushrooms a lot in the same recipes without changing the flavor profile. So if you like your gumbo, you can make it with mushrooms instead of using your sausage. And now you can find great vegan sausages and things like that. But don't be afraid to go around the world in finding the new flavors for the way that you eat. That's the beautiful thing about inclusivity in foodways, is that we are inclusive of every single dietary restriction and every way of eating.
It's interesting because here's another place where our Venn diagram of our foodways that we grew up with intersects, because in my family, meat was also an aside. We ate largely vegetables, we ate legumes and cornbread, so we were actually getting that. I don't know if you've ever read Diet for a Small Planet, but I encourage everyone to, and that concept of mixing a protein with a grain in order to increase the nutritional value and the protein load of both of them. A difficulty that we have is that we've moved very quickly in I don't know, in terms of something, we have moved very quickly from a society in which people needed a 3,000 to 5,000 calorie load a day in order just to produce the food that they could eat to stay alive, into a world in which 2,000 calories a day is an overload for many people. And we don't have to work that hard to get it, and we can very easily overtop it. So we do live with a number of health-related illnesses because we have not adapted what we are doing. But one of the things that I found, when I was growing, I came of age during the counterculture, and health food Nazis were everywhere, right? and the judgments that were made about the foods that I grew up eating were just so negative. But in truth, they were not that bad. You know, one of the things I used to hear all the time is Southerners cook green beans until they're dead. No, Southerners cook green beans until you can access the protein that's in the bean, which was the point of it in the first place. Okay, green bean was not supposed to taste like grass or look like grass. It was supposed to be a bean, hence the bean, of the green bean. And in order to access the nutritional value of the bean, it actually has to be cooked to a digestible level. Lycopene, and I don't know if you all remember the big lycopene tomato craze that happened, and you would find high lycopene tomatoes on their little vines in your grocery store, and you were paying 5 times the amount that you did for another tomato, and you were getting no lycopene from it, because in order to access lycopene, the tomato has to be cooked. So you would have done better if you had needed lycopene to grab a squirt bottle of ketchup and do it in, and rather than eat one of those tomatoes. I mean, there's a reason that ancient foods, or traditional foods, are cooked in the way that they're cooked, prepared in the way that they're prepared, consumed in the ways that they were consumed, and we need to pay attention to that and understand it. And then we can modify it. So I was bitten and written, I was bitten by a lone star tick a couple of years ago and developed what is called, to my family's amusement, alpha-gal syndrome. And this particular syndrome means that I can no longer eat red meat. Side note, I often have to tell young people that yes, pork is a red meat, it is not another white meat, right? But, so I can't eat a lot of, I can't cook my soup beans the way that I cooked soup beans before. In this global world we live in, there's a thing called Spanish smoked paprika. You put Spanish smoked paprika in anything and it's eau de bacon immediately. Add a little olive oil, you've got that wonderful texture, and it's delicious. You just have to sort of think and be creative. Consider it being your really good creative challenge.
And also, because what you know the flavor profile, so that's all you need to know. I guess you're from Louisiana, but that's what you know, and so it just, you use that, you don't need the meat, you're just going to replace it with vegetables and grains and beans, and it
doesn't have to be tofu.
Yeah, not at all. And also, I was thinking, my dear friend Louise Glickman is here, who's from New Orleans, and it made me think about Mildred Covert. Do you remember Miss Mildred? So I've done a lot of work on the Jewish South, and there was this wonderful woman in New Orleans, and her husband was observant and kept kosher, and she did not grow up, and she grew up Jewish, of course, in New Orleans, but did not keep kosher, for sure, but then had to adapt, for her husband. So she ended up, kind of making, kosherizing, all these kind of classic New Orleans and Louisiana dishes, and then went on to publish these books that are called like Kosher Cajun and Kosher Creole, and but they're great, so you can always you have everything you need, you know what it should taste like.
Work on your recipes, and you someday can be an impoverished cookbook writer like the three you see on the slide.
You're just gonna be way healthier than one of the other people.
Which is the perfect segue to close and head to the Malaprops table, right? So
favorite table is table.
that's right. So if you would give our speakers just a minute to get back